Welcome to Devotional Drops, where we explore the richness of Scripture and how it speaks to our lives today. In this episode, we're reflecting on hope in God. You know what's fascinating? Scientists say it takes just 21 days to form a new habit. But when it comes to healing from deep emotional wounds, our brains are wired for a much longer journey. Today, we're exploring why some valleys in life feel endless and what ancient wisdom tells us about finding hope when everything feels dried up.
That's such an interesting parallel to this powerful vision of Ezekiel standing in a valley of dry bones. The imagery is so stark. Imagine being surrounded by nothing but scattered, lifeless remains.
Well, what really strikes me is the historical context. These weren't just random bones. The Israelites were experiencing what psychologists today would call collective trauma. They'd lost their homes, their identity, everything that gave their lives meaning.
Hmm, so how does that connect to modern experiences of hopelessness?
Research shows that about 40% of people experience at least one major depressive episode in their lifetime. It's that same feeling of being in a valley where everything feels dried up and lifeless.
That reminds me of a fascinating case study I read about a woman with treatment-resistant depression. After years of traditional therapy, it wasn't until she embraced this idea of gradual restoration that things started to shift.
Right? And that's exactly what we see in this vision. The bones don't just spring to life instantly. There's this whole process. First connecting, then tendons forming, then flesh appearing. Modern neuroscience actually backs this up. Healing literally rewires our neural pathways over time.
So, what you're saying is that expecting instant transformation might actually be counterproductive?
Exactly. Studies show that sustainable change typically follows what researchers call the valley curve. Things often feel worse before they get better, like those bones rattling together before any visible signs of life appeared.
Well, that connects perfectly to what trauma specialists are discovering about post traumatic growth. Something like 60% of people who go through severe trauma report finding unexpected meaning or purpose through their recovery process.
Speaking of unexpected growth, let me share this remarkable story about a missionary couple who lost everything in a natural disaster. Instead of their faith being destroyed, they discovered what psychologists call spiritual resilience.
That's fascinating. How did their experience reshape their understanding of hope?
Well, they described it as learning to embrace mystery. Rather than needing answers, they found peace in what researchers call tolerance of uncertainty, accepting that some things defy explanation while still moving forward.
You know, that brings up an interesting point about how our brains process uncertainty. Studies show that embracing mystery actually activates different neural pathways than trying to solve problems.
Hmm. And here's what's really interesting. When we look at successful recovery stories, whether from addiction, grief, or trauma, about 85% involve some form of community support. Just like those bones coming together to form an army.
That makes me think about the role of collective healing in modern society. We're seeing more evidence that individual wellness is deeply connected to community well being.
And that's why this ancient vision feels so relevant today. Whether we're talking about personal healing, community restoration, or global recovery, the principles are surprisingly consistent. It takes time, connection, and something beyond our own efforts.
Well said. And it seems like accepting that process might be the first step toward hope.
As we wrap up today, remember this. Research shows that hope itself is actually a learnable skill. Even in our deepest valleys, our brains remain capable of forming new neural pathways toward resilience and renewal. Thank you for joining us on Devotional Drops.